The stars did not twinkle here. They burned cold and still distant fires scattered across the endless dark, too far to offer warmth, too dead to offer hope. The Selene's grace floated in that emptiness like a wounded animal, bleeding light and heat into the void. Ital, once a proud silver curve of Virellan craftsmanship, now bore ugly black scars, evidence of Zarkathi railfire. Whole sections had been vented to space, and the internal power grid flickered with each passing hour. Commander Lorene Vos stood at the fractured observation pane, her reflection dim against the backdrop of a dying galaxy. Her once crisp uniform clung loosely to her frame. Rationing had cut deep, both in fuel and flesh. "Status?" she asked without turning. Her second in command, Sub-Commander Revik, stood rigid behind her, gaunt and pale like everyone else. Life support stable at 14%. No response from Command Relay Theta or any coalition channels. Emergency broadcast has cycled 1,037 times. And no one's listening. Lorene's voice was flat. Not bitter, not broken, just numb. Revik hesitated. We detected something. That made her turn. What kind of something? He handed her a data slate. Unregistered signal. Directional burst. Analog components. Old tech. Possibly. Human. Lorene blinked. That's not funny. I'm not joking. She scanned the waveform. Crude, angular, irregular, but unmistakably artificial. The language was ancient Earth standard, garbled and corrupted, but there. The code repeated every 7 minutes with increasing strength. Whoever, or whatever, it was coming closer. Location. Outer system. 3 AUs. No visual yet. No known transponder. Vos handed the slate back slowly. Put the crew on alert. I want power diverted to sensors and weapons, what's left of them. And I want everyone off the wounded decks. If it's Zarkathi, we can't survive a direct assault. And if it's actually human? Revik asked. Lorene hesitated. Then we pray they remember who they were. Hours passed. The crew braced in silence. The bridge lights flickered again, one of the coolant subsystems failing. In the gloom, the few surviving officers manned dead terminals and stared at blank tactical readouts. It was the quiet before a storm, or a tomb. Then the proximity alarm screamed. A fleet dropped into real space. Not Zarkathi. Not coalition. Ships. Dozens. Asymmetrical, brutal things shaped for function, not beauty. Some were barely larger than freighters. Others rivaled the Selene's grace in mass, but carried visible weapon emplacements on every surface. Some hulls were covered in plating welded from asteroid metals, scorched and pitted with past battles. Others bristled with turrets, dish arrays, and strange, rotating magnetized arms. The largest of them drifted forward. An obsidian spearhead of a ship, its prow shaped like a hammer and its spine lined with glowing red heat vents. It moved like a predator. From its underside, a message burst across every channel. To the vessel identified as Virellan Coalition. You are not alone. Maintain position. Prepare to receive docking protocol. This is the UHS Retribution. On the bridge of the Selene's Grace, the crew was silent. Lorene slowly sat down, her heart pounding against her ribs. Humanity, she whispered, isn't extinct after all. The docking clamps shrieked against the airlock as the boarding ramp engaged. It wasn't smooth or silent like Virellan tech. It was mechanical, harsh, and loud, like something alive and angry was forcing its way aboard. The crew of the Selene's Grace gathered at the central airlock, weapons in hand, but with little will left to fight. None of them had ever seen a human in person, only archival footage from centuries past, always framed with pity or ridicule. The bulkhead hissed and ground open. They were not prepared for what came through. 4 figures stepped aboard, armored head to toe in powered exosuits scuffed by battle and stenciled with old Terran sigils. The armor wasn't decorative. It was functional. Thick plating, reinforced joints, and mounted weapon hardpoints. The lead figure removed her helmet with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a human woman with streaks of gray in her tied-back black hair and eyes like gunmetal. "I'm Captain Elena Drake, UHS Retribution," she said. "Commander Voss." Larine stepped forward, tension radiating from her shoulders. "You're human. Last I checked." There was a pause. Not unfriendly, just loaded. "You received our distress call." Drake nodded. 5 days ago. Took time to reroute. Our fleet doesn't usually come this far out. "We thought your people were gone," Larine said. "Destroyed in the core collapse wars." Drake's lips curled into something between a grin and a grimace. "No, just forgotten. By everyone." Larine opened her mouth, but another crew member interrupted, gasping, "Your ships, what are they built from?" Drake turned as more of her crew filed in. Taller than Virellans, heavier, with that same posture like they'd been born in gravity wells 10 times too strong. One of them patted a metal wall. "Scrap. Asteroids. Decommissioned mining rigs. Doesn't matter. What matters is, they kill." As if on cue, outside the Selenite's fractured viewport, one of the human destroyers fired a test burst. A blue flash from its magnetic rails sent a slug the size of a cargo pod into a drifting asteroid. The rock exploded into a cloud of fire and molten shards. "Your weapons use kinetics?" Larine asked in disbelief. "Kinetics, plasma, shockwave torpedoes, and nukes if we're feeling nostalgic." Drake said it like she was listing tools in a garden shed. Larine blinked. "Those are barbaric, outdated. They work." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Revek shifted uneasily. Behind Drake, a younger human, barely more than a teen, was staring at the Selene's crew like someone observing a lost tribe. Drake softened. "Look, I'm not here to argue design philosophy. We picked up your beacon. We're not coalition. Not under anyone's flag. But we hate the Zarkathi. That's enough for now. You'll help us." Drake gave a slow nod. "We'll keep you breathing. Get your ship running again. Maybe more, depending on what you know." "Why?" Larine asked quietly. "Why help?" Drake's eyes darkened. "Because when Earth screamed for help, the galaxy turned its back." She turned away before anyone could respond. The human fleet made no attempt at diplomacy. The alliance between the Selene's Grace and the UH's Retribution wasn't forged through peace talks or promises. It was born out of mutual desperation. Larine didn't know what to think of the humans yet. They were too different, too direct, too brutal. They didn't carry themselves with the grace of the Virellan people or the honor of the Caliph. They carried themselves with the weight of survival. The next day, Larine was invited to the Retribution's command deck, a sprawling expanse of exposed metal and hums of machinery, where the walls were covered in maps and data screens. There were no pristine tables or polished displays here. Everything was functional. Everything was ready for war. "Commander Voss, this is Lieutenant Simon Graves," Captain Drake said, introducing the stern-faced man seated at one of the consoles. "He's our tech guru, if you can call him that." Graves, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and hands that moved as if constantly adjusting invisible knobs, gave a quick nod. "You want your ship fixed. I'm your guy. But don't expect it to be pretty. We don't have spare parts. We make do." The walls hummed with a low vibration, the pulse of engines and reactors keeping the ship alive. It was nothing like the controlled elegance of Virellan tech. It felt raw, built for function, but always on the edge of collapse. "What's the plan?" Larine asked, trying to focus on the bigger picture. Drake turned her gaze to the display in front of them, where the star systems flickered in and out, rotating in their frozen dance. "We're going after the Zarkathi stronghold on Valfor VI. They're using it as a staging ground for their raids on the outer systems. You're coming with us." Larine stiffened. I told you. This isn't a fight we should take on alone. We'll need reinforcements. We don't have time for reinforcements. Drake cut her off, the harshness in her tone a stark contrast to the calm Virelan demeanor Larine was used to. We fight now, or we die here in the dark. Larine swallowed her retort. She had seen her own people retreat for the same reasons. When survival was the only goal, everything else fell away. She didn't like it, but there was no room for pride in this war. And despite their differences, these humans weren't here for glory. They were here for a reckoning. The next few hours were a blur of preparations. The humans worked at a pace that made Larine dizzy. Machines hummed, thrusters fired up, and the ship's battered systems came back to life, albeit with a strange, shaky rhythm. It wasn't beautiful, but it was functional. The crew barely had time to sleep as they worked together to get ready for what was coming. Larine, Captain Drake called, finding her standing alone at a viewport, gazing at the stars. You and your crew will be in the thick of it. I won't ask you to follow us, but if you want to survive, you better keep up. And trust me when I say, we don't have the luxury of hesitation. Larine turned toward Drake, seeing the unspoken weight in her eyes. The humans had lived this way for too long, on the edge, constantly looking over their shoulders. There was no turning back now. You're right, Larine said, her voice quieter than before. Let's do this. For all of us. Drake's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. We're going to make them regret ever crossing us. The war began in silence. The Retribution and its ragtag fleet moved in the deep of space, staying hidden in the blackness between the stars. No transmissions, no formal declaration of battle. Humanity's style was different. There were no grand speeches, no calls to arms or banners raised. The humans moved with the cold precision of a well-oiled machine, every ship in their fleet fully aware of its role. The Virelans, who had always believed that warfare was a delicate art, watched as the humans prepared with a brutal efficiency that left little room for anything other than violence. Larine's hands gripped the armrest of her seat as the stars outside the Selenae's Grace's viewport flickered by. Her crew worked in quiet focus, tension visible on every face. They had seen skirmishes, they had seen the brutal edge of war, but nothing like this. Humanity didn't care for formalities. They cared only about one thing: victory. Enemy ships identified. Revek's voice came through the bridge speakers, his tone clipped. Multiple Zarkathi warships. At least 15. They're positioned around the Valthor VI's primary orbital platform. Larine's heart skipped a beat. 15. Humanity's response was almost immediate. Target acquisition complete, came a voice from the Retribution's bridge. We're launching a full strike on their lead ship, calculating the best trajectory. Do it, Drake's voice rang out clearly across the intercom. There was no hesitation in it. No doubt. Larine barely had time to register the words before the battlefield erupted into chaos. Boom. The first explosion came from the Retribution's forward cannon, a massive magnetic railgun burst that streaked across the distance between the fleets in the blink of an eye. The slug struck the lead Zarkathi warship directly in its bridge. In less than a second, the massive vessel was torn apart like paper under a child's fist. Debris scattered in every direction. Is it over? One of the Virelan officers asked, awe in his voice. Drake's reply was cold and steady, like a soldier speaking to their troops in the midst of the storm. It's just getting started. Larine's stomach twisted as the rest of the Zarkathi fleet responded, launching retaliatory fire. In the blink of an eye, the vastness of space was filled with flashes of energy, plasma cannons, and missiles. The humans didn't shy away. The Retribution's guns blazed with ruthless precision, obliterating enemy ships with every shot. Virelan fighters joined in, swarming the skies like insects, tearing apart anything that dared to challenge them. The hybrid fleet, human and Virelan, an unlikely alliance forged in blood, was merciless. Larine watched in stunned silence as a Zarkathi destroyer, was shredded by a concentrated burst from a human fusion cannon. The ship's shields flickered, and then the main reactor imploded, sending a shockwave that shattered its hull in an instant. It was over before the crew could even react. "This isn't war," Lorene whispered, watching the battlefield with a strange sense of awe. "This is slaughter." Drake's voice came through once again, the same unyielding command at its core. "War is slaughter, Commander. You fight, or you die. No exceptions." The battlefield was chaos. Ships collided. Explosions rippled through the blackness. But through it all, the human fleet moved with cold purpose. They were not here for a battle. They were here to erase the Zarkathi. A Zarkathi cruiser, bigger and tougher than the others, broke from the pack, targeting the Selenae's Grace with its own powerful weapons. Lorene's breath caught in her throat. The ship was too close. There was no way to avoid its trajectory. But before Lorene could even think of giving an order, a missile from the Retribution slammed into the cruiser's side. The impact tore a hole wide enough to drive a capital ship through, splitting the Zarkathi vessel in two. "This is war," Drake repeated through the comm. "And in war, we win." The Zarkathi, in the face of this overwhelming fury, began to retreat. Their numbers faltered. But humanity had just begun. The battle above Valfor VI had ended in a blaze of fire and destruction. The Zarkathi fleet, what remained of it, retreated into the blackness of deep space, leaving behind scattered debris and the echo of their defeat. The humans didn't celebrate. They didn't need to. For them, this was simply another chapter in the endless war for survival. For the Virellans, however, it was a brutal awakening. Lorene stood on the bridge of the Selenae's Grace, watching the human ships orbit the shattered remains of the Zarkathi stronghold. The wreckage of enemy vessels scattered across the battlefield like broken toys. For a moment, there was a silence, unsettling, still. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. The humans had done what they promised, and the Zarkathi were reeling. And yet, something gnawed at Lorene. The humans had fought with efficiency, but also with a coldness she wasn't sure she could understand. They didn't feel this war. They didn't grieve for the lives lost. They simply fought. "Commander Vos," Captain Drake's voice crackled through the intercom, drawing Lorene from her thoughts. "I need you to come to the hangar bay. Now." Lorene didn't hesitate. She left the bridge and made her way to the lower decks, where the human ships were unloading their cargo. The hangar was alive with activity. Human technicians, battle-hardened soldiers, and officers moved in perfect synchrony, like a single organism working towards a common goal. Their focus was unyielding. It reminded Lorene of the way a predator's eyes never wavered from its prey. When she arrived, Captain Drake was standing near a group of freshly surrendered Zarkathi. Alien warriors, stripped of their weapons, knelt on the cold metal floor with their heads down in submission. Lorene's stomach twisted. These were the same creatures who had killed so many Virellans, so many humans. And now they were here, alive, captured, defeated. Drake didn't seem bothered by it. She crossed her arms and surveyed the scene with a steely gaze. "Are you planning to kill them?" Lorene asked, her voice harsh. Drake's eyes flicked toward her, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "We'll keep them alive. For now. They might be useful." Lorene shook her head. "Useful? These are the same ones who slaughtered my people, your people. Why are you sparing them?" "Because we're not here to slaughter them," Drake replied, her voice cold. "We're here to make them remember. These aren't soldiers. They're victims. Victims of a system that turned them into monsters. And we're going to give them a chance to rebuild, if they can prove they want something other than war." The words hit Lorene like a slap. She'd been raised in a world where survival was key, where the strong crushed the weak, and where mercy was a luxury. But as she stood there, looking at the faces of the Zarkathi, ragged, defeated, but still alive, she couldn't help but question the humans' approach. "I don't understand," Lorene muttered, her voice quiet. Why not just wipe them out, make sure they can never hurt anyone again? Drake stepped closer, her eyes meeting Lorraine's with a kind of grim resolve. Because, Commander, if we become like them, if we stop seeing the value in life, in giving others the chance to change, then we're no better than the monsters we're fighting. That is what the Zarkathi want. They'd want us to become like them. Lorraine didn't respond immediately. She couldn't. She didn't know if she agreed, or if she could ever see things the way the humans did. Their worldview was too foreign, too harsh for her to fully accept. But there was something in Drake's eyes, something that spoke of years spent fighting against odds so overwhelming that mercy was a rare commodity, if it existed at all. As the Zarkathi prisoners were escorted away, Lorraine felt a strange weight settle over her. These humans, for all their coldness, had something she couldn't yet grasp. Maybe it was strength, or maybe it was a sense of purpose. But whatever it was something her people had lost long ago. You don't need to understand it, Commander, Drake said, as if reading her thoughts. You just need to trust that it works. Lorraine watched the prisoners disappear into the depths of the ship, the bitter taste of war still heavy in the air. I'll trust you, she said softly. For now, the quiet aftermath of battle settled over Valfor Vi, but it was not a peaceful calm. The shattered remains of the Zarkathi stronghold drifted in the shadow of the planet, floating debris that had once been a symbol of Zarkathi dominance. Now, it was a graveyard, tangible evidence of humanity's retribution. Lorraine had thought the humans would rest after their victory, but instead, the fleet continued to move with unrelenting precision. The Retribution and its sister ships had already begun the recovery process, salvaging whatever they could from the wreckage. It was practical, utilitarian, and to Lorraine's growing unease, it was what the humans did best. They didn't pause to mourn. They didn't stop to reflect. They just worked. In the mess hall aboard the Selena's Grace, the crew had gathered for their first real meal in weeks. The food was bland and processed, but it was a luxury they no longer took for granted. The humans had supplied them with ration packs, an unexpected gesture of camaraderie. As Lorraine took her seat at the table, she found herself surrounded by the crew, who were talking quietly, but with a sense of relief in their voices. They had lived through the storm. They were still alive. But that feeling didn't last long. Commander, Revik's voice cut through the chatter. There's something you need to see. Lorraine looked up, her expression hardening. She stood up, wiping her hands on her uniform, and followed Revik to the communication center. As she entered, the holographic screen lit up, displaying a series of encrypted transmissions from the human fleet. What is this? She asked, frowning at the stream of data. They're decrypting an old Zarkathi command network, Revik explained. And we found something. The location. The next Zarkathi stronghold. And something more. Lorraine crossed her arms as she examined the data. It was a black site hidden deep within a nebula. A facility so remote it was almost impossible to detect. The Zarkathi had been using it as a staging ground for new weapons development. But what made her stomach twist was what lay beneath that. A string of coded messages that identified humans. They weren't just any humans, either. These were survivors, prisoners taken during the core collapse wars, held in secret. Where is this place? Lorraine asked, her voice cold. Deep in the Margena Nebula, Revik replied. It's heavily fortified. It will be a challenge to get in. But the implications... I know, Lorraine said quietly. The realization hit her like a sledgehammer. Humanity's survival was not just about fighting back against the Zarkathi. It was personal. The Zarkathi had taken their people, had used them as pawns in their twisted game. You're planning to go after them, aren't you? Revik asked, his voice soft. Lorraine's heart raced. There was no choice. The Zarkathi had crossed a line. It wasn't enough to fight them anymore. They needed to make them pay for the lives lost, for the years of suffering. But even as the resolve hardened within her, a part of Lorraine couldn't help but wonder, how much of humanity's fight was about survival, and how much of it was about revenge. The answer, she suspected, was something the humans themselves weren't yet ready to face. "Prepare the fleet," Lorene ordered, her voice steady. "We're going after them. And this time, we're not stopping until every last Zarkathi stronghold is gone." Revik nodded, the weight of the task settling over him. "Understood." As Lorene turned away from the display, the feeling of inevitability settled deep in her chest. They were going to war again. But this time, it wasn't just for survival, it was for a reckoning. Humanity had already shown them how far they were willing to go. Now it was their turn to fight, side by side, with these strangers who had become allies. Together, they would strike at the heart of the Zarkathi Empire. And when it was over, no one would be left to remember who started it all. The Marjana Nebula was a place of terror and silence, a swirling mass of dust, gas, and stellar remnants where nothing seemed to survive for long. It was the perfect hiding spot for the Zarkathi's black site, an outpost so well concealed within the dense clouds that it had remained undiscovered for centuries. But the humans had found it, and now, the combined forces of humanity and the Virellans were moving in for the final strike. The Retribution led the charge, flanked by the Selenae's Grace and a handful of smaller Virellan vessels. There was no turning back now. This was the last stand, not just for the prisoners, but for everything humanity had been fighting for since their near extinction in the Core Collapse Wars. Lorene stood on the bridge of the Selenae's Grace, her gaze fixed on the swirling nebula ahead. The atmosphere was tense, every crew member aware that the operation they were about to undertake could be their last. But in the face of uncertainty, there was something else that drove them now. It was not just revenge or survival, but the chance to end the war, once and for all. "Fleet Readiness Report," Captain Drake's voice echoed over the comms, cutting through the silence. "Ready for combat, Captain," came the response from Lieutenant Graves. "Weapon systems online. All ships prepped for the assault." Drake nodded. "Good. Let's move out. Everyone, stay sharp." The fleet began its descent into the heart of the nebula, where the Zarkathi stronghold lay hidden. The nebula's dense gases began to interfere with their sensors, and the stars around them seemed to vanish, leaving only the oppressive darkness. It was like moving through a tomb, a graveyard of dead stars. As they approached, Lorene's mind was awash with the thoughts of what lay ahead. Prisoners, human prisoners, captives of the Zarkathi. She thought back to the faces of the Zarkathi soldiers they had taken alive after the battle at Valfor Vi. Their surrender had not come from fear, but from the realization that they were beaten. They knew it was over. The question now was what the humans would do next. "Enemy forces detected." Revik's voice came over the comms, snapping Lorene from her thoughts. "At least 20 ships, all heavily armed." Drake's response was calm, almost too calm. "We'll deal with them. Everyone, prepare to engage." Lorene's grip tightened on the railing as she watched the ships around them maneuver into position. The battle was inevitable, but it would not be an easy one. The Zarkathi stronghold was heavily fortified, and the forces arrayed against them were formidable. They would need to use every ounce of their cunning and strength to break through. "Engage at will," Drake ordered, and the first volley of plasma fire erupted from the human fleet. The skies of the nebula lit up with bursts of green and blue as the battle began in earnest. The Zarkathi ships fired back with their own weaponry, massive explosions flashing across the dark expanse. But the humans were relentless. The Retribution's weapons blazed with a fury that seemed to defy nature itself, cutting through the Zarkathi lines with terrifying precision. Lorene's ship shook as they took a hit, but the shields held. She watched as human ships, agile and brutal, moved like predators in the dark, picking off enemy targets one by one. The Virellan ships were more methodical, but no less deadly. Together, they formed an unbreakable wall, a force of nature the Zarkathi couldn't hope to defeat. Despite their fierce resistance, the Zarkathi were overwhelmed. With each ship they lost, their morale crumbled further. The humans' relentless assault was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. "We're breaking through," Revok reported, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Their defenses are collapsing." Drake's voice came through the comms, steady and commanding as always. "We're not stopping until every last one of them is gone." Lareen felt her heart race. They were winning. After all this time, after all the pain, the loss, the struggle, victory was within reach. But there was no time to savor it. The final push had begun. They would either finish this fight, or it would finish them. In the chaos of battle, a voice rang through the bridge. "Commander Voss," Revok said, looking up from his console. "The prisoners, they're being held in the main facility. We can reach them in 15 minutes. Lareen's eyes hardened with resolve. There was no hesitation now. "We go in," she said, her voice a low growl of determination. "Prepare the boarding teams. We end this today." And with that, the final stage of the war began. The Zarkathi were broken. The humans were relentless. And there would be no mercy. The final assault on the Zarkathi stronghold was a whirlwind of gunfire, explosions, and the relentless march of humanity's fury. The Retribution led the charge, weaving through the debris-filled corridors of the enemy station, while the Selenae's Grace followed closely behind. The nebula outside had turned into a battlefield, a chaotic sky filled with the remnants of the Zarkathi fleet, now a testament to the unyielding might of the humans. Lareen stood on the bridge of the Selenae's Grace, eyes focused ahead. Her fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, her heart pounding. This was it, the end of the war. The Zarkathi's hold on the galaxy would crumble here, in the ruins of their own making. But even as the adrenaline surged, a gnawing emptiness tugged at her. This war had taken so much, so many lives, so many friends. Could there be peace after this? Approaching the facility, Revok called out from his station, preparing to dock. The Zarkathi station loomed ahead, its exterior scarred from the battle, but still a towering symbol of their former strength. Lareen's jaw clenched as they approached. She could almost taste the end of it. The chance to free the human prisoners, the chance to deal the final blow. "Boarding teams ready," Captain Drake's voice came through the comms, calm and cold. "We move in 5. Lareen gave a final nod and turned to face her crew. "Remember why we're here. We do this for the future. For those who've been taken, for those we've lost. We end this today." The docking procedure was swift. The sound of the airlock opening echoed through the corridors of the Selenae's Grace. Armed and ready, Lareen and her team stepped into the enemy stronghold, their boots hitting the cold metal floor with a resounding thud. The station was eerily quiet, the silence punctuated only by the distant hum of power generators and the soft clicking of equipment as the humans and Varellans moved in with deadly precision. Their path was clear: secure the facility, free the prisoners, and eliminate any remaining Zarkathi forces. "Check your corners," Drake's voice came over the comms, a reminder to stay sharp. Lareen moved forward, her rifle at the ready. Every step felt heavy, but there was no fear, not anymore. After the chaos of the battle, this felt almost too easy, but Lareen knew better than to let her guard down. The Zarkathi were desperate, and desperation made them dangerous. They made their way deeper into the station, and soon they found what they were looking for. Behind thick, reinforced doors, human prisoners huddled together in dimly lit cells. Their faces were gaunt, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion, but as soon as they saw the humans from the Retribution, a flicker of hope sparked. Lareen's heart caught in her throat. These were the same survivors who had been taken so long ago, slaves of the Zarkathi. But now they were free. "Stay calm," Drake ordered as she motioned to the prisoners. "You're safe now. We'll get you out." Lareen moved forward to unlock the nearest cell, her hands shaking as the door clicked open. The survivors spilled out, looking dazed but grateful. One woman, a young soldier with tattered clothes, approached Lorene, her eyes filled with a deep, unspoken sorrow. "Thank you," the woman whispered. "Thank you for bringing us home." But before Lorene could respond, the station's alarms blared, a shrill warning that something was wrong. The final Zarkathi resistance was closing in. "No time for thanks," Drake barked. "Get them to the shuttle. Now." The crew rushed the prisoners toward the escape pods, but the Zarkathi forces weren't far behind. Blasts rang out as the doors burst open, revealing a group of Zarkathi soldiers, their weapons raised. The final showdown was upon them. Lorene's heart pounded in her chest as she fired. The Zarkathi fought fiercely, but the humans and Varellans were faster, better coordinated. In the end, it was no contest. The last of the Zarkathi forces were wiped out, their attempt at a counteroffensive crushed. The final battle was over. As the last shuttle doors closed and the crew of the Selenae's Grace made their escape, Lorene turned her gaze to the destruction they were leaving behind. The Zarkathi Empire was broken, their strongholds reduced to rubble, their forces scattered. But Lorene knew this was not the end. There would be a long road ahead, one of rebuilding and healing. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of something new. Hope. The galaxy was scared, but not beyond redemption. Humanity had shown them how far they were willing to go. And in that sacrifice, in that unwavering determination, Lorene had found something she could finally believe in. The galaxy had been given a second chance, and they were going to take it.